Hello again, and welcome to another Blender tutorial. There's no geometry nodes this time, but I am pretty excited about this one. So after the last video, I decided that the channel should have its own logo. So I put something together and made this quick animation for the reveal. I'm super happy with how this turned out, and it was also a lot of fun to make. So I decided to put together this tutorial and share it with all of you. Now, this first video is going to focus mostly on modeling and animation, and then after that, we'll get into the materials and cameras and so forth. So, yeah, let's get started. The first step is obviously going to be to download or design whatever logo you're going to use. For this demonstration, I'm just going to use the Blender logo. So I'm going to switch into top orthographic, get rid of the default cube, and bring in my reference image. And I'm going to change the opacity down to 0.5 just so I can see a little bit better. And I want to move this so it's pretty close to the center. And then I'm going to toggle this so that I can't accidentally select this later. Now we're going to just outline our logo, and I'm going to use a little bit extra geometry just to make sure all my curves are smooth and so forth. I'm not going to use a subdivision surface modifier later to smooth things out, so I need to make sure I have enough geometry now. Now that I have everything outlined, I want to make sure that I merge everything by distance, so I'm just going to hit M and B, and you can see that removed a few vertices. We just want to make sure we don't have any duplicated geometry here. Go ahead and hide our reference image, and I want to move our camera up and kind of frame that final shot in the animation. So let's take the location to 0 and 0 out the rotation as well. I'll hit 0 on the numpad. And we can just move this Z location up, get it about where we want it. Put that at 9. And I'm going to go back to our logo object and add in a plane. Scale that up so it covers the entire picture frame there. And I'm going to go ahead and delete the base. And then I'm just going to make a series of planes out of the geometry that we have. And don't worry about this having proper topology or anything. We don't need quads for this particular tutorial. Let's switch over to the UV editing workspace. I'm going to go to top orthographic, and I'm going to hide the camera for now. And then I just want to select everything. We can go up to UV and unwrap, and you can see that gives us kind of a wonky edge there. So I'm actually just going to do project from view. That should give us a perfect UV layout for this. And I want to scale this up so that just the logo is taking up as much of this UV space as possible. And we can go back to the layout, and I'm going to rename our original shape to canvas. then we can just duplicate that, right click and leave it where it is. I'm going to rename this to Cutout. You can hide the canvas and tab into the cutout. We're going to go to face select mode, and we're just going to select these areas for the cutout. We'll just hit P and separate by selection. Then we have cutout 1, and we'll do the center section as well. We'll do separate by selection, and then we have cutout 2. And then we can select all of those. Actually, let me tab out of the first cutout and make sure we select all of those. Hit tab, and now we're editing all 3 of them. And if I just hit A and extrude that, you just go down for a reasonably thick plate there. If I tab back out, now you can see we've actually got, those are all the same thickness. And a good thing to check at this point is to make sure that we have all our outside faces, and you can see everything's blue, so we don't have any back face there. We can turn off our face orientation overlay, and then I'm also going to hide our cutout pieces and turn the canvas back on. Switch into edit mode on the canvas, and I want to create the paths that our cut tips are going to follow. So to do that, I'm just going to go into edge select mode, and we're going to select this outside path, holding Alt Shift and clicking selects those sections, and make sure you unselect the extraneous pieces of that. Now we're going to hit P and separate by selection, and we're going to call this cut path 1. And I'll select the next section, hit P again, separate by selection, call this cut path 2. And finally this innermost section, and separate by selection again, and we call that cut path 3. Now we can hide the canvas. And then I'm going to select each one of these and right click on it and convert to a curve. And like I said, we're going to use these paths to animate our cut tips. So let me add in an icosphere, and that's going to represent a cut tip. And we'll change the radius down to 0.01. So that's very small. And in order to get it to follow the path, all we're going to do is go down to this object constraint properties and add a follow path. And then we can just tell it the target is cut path 1. And looks like if it doesn't jump to the path immediately, if you just go over to the path properties and turn off this path animation, turn it back on, now you can see our cut tip is actually on that path. So to animate this, you can see this offset, which starts at 0. We go all the way around to 100. It'll be back where it started. So I actually want this first cut tip to start up here. Because this outside path is quite a bit longer than these inner paths, I'm actually going to have 2 cut tips going around that outside path. So let's start this one. We can start this one at 50. And we're going to have our cutting animation. We'll start cutting at frame 30, and we'll cut for 10 seconds to frame 330. So I'll bring this end of the animation up to 400. So at frame 30, we're going to be at 50. So I'll just hover over this offset here, hit I to put in a keyframe, and then I'll jump to frame 330. We'll bring this up to 100, hover again, hit I to add another keyframe. So now if we go back to the start, hit the spacebar, our animation will run, and it'll get to that start point, and it'll stop there. And while that's running, I'm going to switch over to particle physics, or particle settings. We're going to add a particle system to this cut tip, and this is going to be for the sparks that are going to be flying off of the cutter. So let's change this to spark settings. And while I'm here, let's change this to cut tip before we forget. And we'll change this emitter, change the number to 10,000. And for the frame start, so this is when the sparks are going to start to fly, we're going to set that to 30 and the end frame to 330. And this lifetime is how long those sparks are going to last. So we're going to bring this down to 20 and just add 0.5 to randomize that. And you can see by default it's using these halo objects. We actually want our own object for that. So let's add another icosphere. I'm going to zoom in on that. We'll bring the subdivisions down to 1. Leave the radius the same. But I actually want to scale this just on the Z. We'll scale it down to 0.5. Hit Control A and apply that scale. We can go back to our cut tip, and under this render properties, change this from halo to object. And then we can scroll down, set this instance object. Right now it says icosphere, so let's change this to spark. And that should change down there. Then if I hit spacebar, you can see it starts at animation. Those are all very small. So let's bring the scale up. Bring that to 0.15. And then change this scale randomness. We'll bring that to 0.5 as well. If we zoom in, you can see they're kind of all oriented in exactly the same way. So let's turn on this rotation and expand those properties. And we'll just randomize these and randomize the phase as well. If I go forward a few frames, you can see now that all facing in different directions. Minimize that. And then I also want to check, so for this velocity, you can expand those properties. Change it to 0.5 off the normal, and then add 0.5 on the Z. And I also want to randomize this. Let's bring this up to 0.5. That should be pretty good. But then you can also see it's not interacting with the surface at all. So we're going to use the canvas and add some physics properties to that. We'll just add collision to that. And just so that those particles don't bounce too high, we're going to bring this damping up to 0.1. And go back to this and play it again. You can see now those particles are spreading out along the surface. It should be pretty good for the particle system. So at this point, I can copy that cut tip and change the animation. So instead of starting at 50, we can have this one start at 0. Add a keyframe there. Go to frame 330, and this one can end at 50. Give that a keyframe. And we can duplicate this again and change the cut path to cut path 2. And we're going to have to do the same thing. Switch over here, turn this path animation off and on again. Go back to cut tip 2, to the object constraint properties. And I want this one to start somewhere over here. So let's go back to frame 30. Now bring this around so it's around, put it at 65. Give that a keyframe. Then we can go to 330 and give that another keyframe at 165, so it should be all the way back around. Make sure you hover over that and add a keyframe there. And then we'll duplicate this one more time. Put that on cut path 3 and select the third cut path. Toggle this off and on again so it jumps onto that path. And I actually want this inner one to move in the opposite direction. So let's actually, we can clear the keyframes off of this. Go back to frame 30. And I want this to start somewhere over here. So let's go to start at 185. And then I actually want to subtract 100 from that. So I want to go in the opposite direction. So we'll go to frame 330 and just drop 100 off of that. So we'll just go to 85. And I forgot to put a keyframe on the first one. Let's go back to 30. Put that at 185 again and give that a keyframe. So now if we watch that animation, we should see all these cut tips go around and stop where they need to, and I'll have that particle system set up on them. So that should be good for the cut tip animation. The next thing we're going to do is add in our lasers. So let's just do a mesh cylinder, and I want the radius to be half what the cut tip radius was. So we're going to do 0.005. We can change the vertex count down to 8 because it doesn't need to be very high resolution. Right click on that and do shade smooth. And then I'm going to go to the front orthographic, and I want to bring in the camera again just so we can see where that is. And we're going to bring our laser up so that the origin sits about a meter above that camera. And then I'll tab into that and move all the geometry down so the top of it is about the same as the origin. And then I'm going to do Alt-Z to enable the X-ray mode, just to make sure that I select all the vertices down here. And then we can take those, and I just want to move them down along the Z-axis. And just make sure they're a little bit below the origin down here. So I'll tab back out of that. I can do Alt-Z to undo the X-ray mode. And while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to rename this to laser. Then we're going to go down to our object constraint properties and add an object constraint to that. And we're just going to do this track 2 constraint. And our first laser can follow cut tip. And then we'll duplicate that, right click, and this is laser 1, it can follow cut tip 1. Laser 2, cut tip 2, and finally laser 3 on cut tip 3. So now if we zoom in on this a little bit, start the animation, we can see everything should be following our cut tips. And I'm going to jump to the camera, and I just want to make sure that none of my lasers are clipping on the actual picture frame. I don't care that they're clipping outside of it, that's fine. So now the only thing left is to animate our cutouts. So I'll bring those back in. Stop the animation. I'll select cutout 1, and we're just going to animate this with rigid body physics. So I'll go into the physics property and click on rigid body. And for now, we can leave these settings the same and apply the same thing to cutout 2. So if I go to the beginning, you can see that animation starts immediately and our cutouts begin falling away from the very start, which is not the way we want this to run. So we're going to go over to scene properties, and you can see we have this rigid body world settings. We can expand those and expand this cache, and we can start this simulation at the end of our cutting sequence, which was frame 330. And we'll just end this. We have the end of this animation at 400 right now, so we'll just go to 400. If you go back to the beginning hit spacebar, we can skip ahead, but you see at frame 330, it doesn't actually do anything. I found the way to fix that is if you go back to one of your cutouts and go to the physics properties, delete the rigid body physics, and then re-enable it. Now if you start the animation over, you can see those start falling away at frame 330. But there is a slight issue with this. So if we go back, let's look from down here. We'll scrub through the time frame. You can see at frame 330, for some reason, this cutout is moving up. And the reason for that, so we've got cutout 1 selected. The reason is this shape, this convex hull setting. It's simplifying the geometry for this, and it's actually covering that hole. So these two objects, even though they're not touching, are actually, the simulation thinks that they are. So to fix that, what we can do is change this convex hull setting for the shape to mesh, and we'll just do this for the outside shape because that's the only one that has this complex a shape. So if we go back to the beginning, we can watch that animation again. Now they both fall away pretty simply. So if we go back up to the camera view, you can see they just fall straight down, which is pretty boring. So let's add in a couple of obstructions just to make this more interesting. I'm going to use a mesh cube. I'm going to go to top orthographic, and I'm going to hide the camera again for now. We can just scale this cube way down because we just want to have the very corner of that block our cutout from falling. So I'm going to rename this to obstruction, and let's go to the front orthographic, and we'll make sure that this is just below our plane. Go back to top orthographic, and I'm going to add Shift-D, duplicate this. We're going to add another one to obstruct our other cutout. And then for both of these, we're just going to add rigid body physics and change this type from active to passive. And we can start that animation over. See how that goes. Go back to the start. You can see, again, we have this problem where our cutout is actually moving up. And this is, again, a problem with the way we have the collision set up. So when you change this to mesh, it's going to add this sensitivity, and it's going to give you, by default, a margin of 0.04 meters. Because this is so simple, we can just move that to 0. Go back to the start, and that should fix our animation. So now as soon as it hits the end of that cut, it should drop and fall away immediately. And if we go back to our camera view, we can watch that one more time from the top down. And that is pretty much it for the modeling and animation portion of the tutorial. In the next video, we'll go over how I created the materials for this project, including some dynamic paint stuff, which I can't wait to show you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know what you think of the logo in the comments. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.